My name is Brooklyn Sanders. I am 27 years old. When I was just a girl of 10, I learned something most children are lucky enough to unlearn, that adults don't always play fair, especially at Christmas. And especially when money is involved. My father, Henry Sanders, was a toy maker. Not the kind who simply owned a shop and hired workers. He was the magic. His fingers carved dreams out of pine, maple, and oak. Dolls with blinking eyes, wooden trains that puffed steam, rocking horses that creaked like lullabies. Our family business, Sanders and Bell, nestled in the snow-covered town of Mapleton, was more than a factory. It was a miracle dressed in red ribbon every December. And then there was him, Walter Bell, my father's partner, his best friend since college, the man I used to call Uncle Walt. I remember it clearly. The Christmas I turned 11, snow danced outside the factory windows as we watched my father and Walter shake hands in front of the town's mayor. A new contract had been signed. Orders for toys were at an all-time high. The press had even come down from Hartford to interview them. Papa told me, "Brookie, one day this will all be yours. But not everything that glitters is gold, and not every handshake is honest." On Christmas Eve, while children across town hung stockings and sang carols, Walter Bell came into our home. I was sitting by the fireplace with a cocoa cup nearly too big for my hands. He patted my head and said, "Brookie, you're going to be just fine." The next morning, the factory no longer bore both names, just one, Bell Toys. Father didn't say much that day. He stood in silence, the snow falling gently on his overcoat as the sign was taken down. I remember clenching my fists, watching the workman replace our name with his. I didn't understand the paperwork, the fine print, the betrayal, but I saw the pain in my father's eyes. He died 6 months later. A heart attack, they said, but I believe it was heartbreak. Walter sent flowers, a cheap bouquet of carnations. We lost the house soon after. Mother and I moved into my aunt's attic. I dropped out of school for a year to help sell handmade trinkets at a roadside stall. Wooden birds, clothespin angels, scraps of memory. Every time I passed by the Bell Toys factory, I felt like I was walking over my father's grave. Years passed. Pain changed shape. It hardened into resolve. Walter Bell built an empire off my father's ideas. Every Christmas, his face appeared in the town paper, smiling next to a tower of toy donations, pretending to be the St. Nicholas of manufacturing. And every year, I promised myself that I'd make him remember that he didn't just take a company, he took a legacy. He took a father from a daughter. He took Christmas, but I wasn't going to let him keep it. And so, with nothing but grief in my pocket and fire in my bones, I began. I worked 3 jobs, studied finance by candlelight, and learned every corner of the business he stole. I didn't want pity. I wanted power, the kind that didn't need a nameplate to be felt. By the time I was 20, I had invested in my first toy design patent. At 22, I opened a small workshop in Glenfield. At 25, I merged with 2 other independent creators. And now, at 27, it's December again, and I've just finalized the paperwork. Bell Toys is in debt, and I'm the silent buyer who now owns 51% of its assets. Walter Bell doesn't know it yet, but this Christmas, I'm not hanging up stockings, I'm hanging his legacy on the door and slamming it shut. The ink was barely dry on the contract when I walked into the cold glass office tower in Hartford, headquarters of Bell Toys. The secretary, a prim little woman named Judith with hair pulled tighter than the company's fiscal reports, didn't recognize me. Why would she? The last time I walked past that logo, I was a girl with a father wearing hand-me-down mittens and dreaming of sleigh bells. Now, I wore navy wool, tailored, not expensive, just sharp, precise, like the plan I'd stitched together over the past decade. "I'm here to see Mr. Bell," I said. She flipped her appointment book and asked, "Your name?" "Tell him, Miss Sanders. He'll want to hear it." Her brows tightened. She dialed the inner line. "Mr. Bell, there's a Miss Sanders to see you." "Yes, yes, sir. I'll send her in." I could hear the tone shift in her voice. Panic, maybe, or just the echo of history returning. The door clicked open, and there he was, Walter Bell, gray hair now, slicked back as if age hadn't softened him. A heavy coat hung over his chair. The room smelled like cigars and pinewood polish. His office overlooked downtown. Toys, classic wooden ones, ironically lined the shelves. "Well," he said, standing slowly. "I'll be damned, not yet," I replied. His chuckle faltered. He motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. "You've grown," he said. "You look just like your mother. You still look like a man who steals things that don't belong to him." He sighed. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm not here to think," I interrupted. "I'm here to inform." I placed the folder on his desk. Legal documents, financial breakdowns, ownership transfers, sealed in crisp cream stationery. You're staring at the new majority stakeholder of Bell Toys. As of this morning, the controlling interest 51% is mine. You've been bleeding investors, Walter. Holiday delays, cost-cutting scandals, quiet lawsuits you hoped wouldn't get out. I watched it all. I waited. He looked like someone had punched him square in the chest. I made a quiet offer too. Your shareholders one by one. The smart ones took it, the desperate ones needed it, and the proud ones, well, I reminded them you're no longer a Bell worth betting on. His voice was hoarse now. You've got no right. You gave up your rights when you took my father's name off the building. He stood now, trembling slightly, gripping the edge of his desk. What do you want? That was the question, wasn't it? I looked around the office, his trophies, his holiday press clippings, the framed picture of him at the Lexington Christmas Gala shaking hands with the mayor. What I want, I said slowly, is for this place to close. He stared. I want every machine shut down, every assembly line dismantled, every door locked before the 25th. I want the world to know that Bell Toys, the legacy you built by lying, cheating, and killing my father's spirit, is no longer part of Christmas. That's madness, he rasped. Do you know how many families rely on this factory? How many orders we save? The speech, I said, my tone iron now. This isn't about the orders, or the workers. I've already taken care of them. Every craftsman you employ has been offered positions at Sanders' workshop, reopening next month under my family's name, with better pay. He sank back into his chair, defeated. You ruined Christmas for me, Walter. When I was a child, when I lost my father, when I watched the only honest man I knew get crushed by someone he trusted, and now you're returning the favor, he muttered. No, I said quietly. I'm restoring balance. As I turned to leave, he asked one more question, his voice a whisper. Why now? I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Because it's December, I said, and I wanted to give my father one last gift. I didn't cry walking out of that building. Not because I wasn't angry, or heartbroken, or human, but because I had shed those tears already years ago, on a bitter December night, and Mama told me Daddy wasn't coming home. She'd clutched a letter from Bell Toys in her trembling hands, stamped with a signature that shattered our world. Walter Bell. I was 16, old enough to understand betrayal, too young to stop it. That's when I stopped believing in Santa Claus, or miracles, or family friends with gold pens and empty promises. Walter hadn't just taken the company, he'd taken the Christmas spirit from our town. Sanders Toys had been more than a workshop. It was tradition, a place where fathers brought sons to watch toy trains run loops, where wooden dolls were carved by hand, where every Christmas, Daddy threw open the factory doors and gave away boxes of toys to any child who couldn't afford one. He called it the giving morning. No cameras, no donations, just kindness. But Walter saw numbers, not memories. Efficiency, not legacy. When Daddy died suddenly, heart failure, the doctor said Walter slid in like frost under a doorframe. Within months, the company was his. Mama didn't have the strength to fight it in court. She packed our things, and we left Millridge for good. But I came back, 10 years later. I drove the winding snow-covered road back into that town with its cracked sidewalks and faded store signs, and I knew it was time to rebuild what he'd tried to erase. First, I walked through the old Sanders factory. The building had sat shuttered for years, its windows dusted with time, its chimney cold. I ran my hand over the main workbench, Daddy's bench still scarred with initials from decades of apprentices. I remembered how he used to whistle while he worked, how the scent of cedar and peppermint clung to his coat. Then I found the photo, tucked inside a drawer, wrapped in wax paper, Daddy and me. I was 7, perched on his shoulders, holding a handmade nutcracker painted with gold buttons. We were both laughing. I had lost that memory until that moment. It became my cornerstone. I pinned the photo inside my wallet and began the next phase, rebuilding. I called in a team of architects, all local, told them I wanted the original blueprints, honored every arch, every brick, but with updated tools, better safety, and a workshop that trained orphans in craftsmanship. Next, I met with the laid-off workers from Bell Toys. Some were skeptical, remembering how Walter had fed them lies every Christmas. Others remembered my father and signed on without blinking. The new company wouldn't be Bell Toys. It wouldn't even be Sanders Toys. It would be Legacy Workshop, a place where stories were carved into wood and passed down for generations. A place with no corner offices, no velvet ropes. Then came the real move. The Lexington Holiday Market, an annual tradition, was where Bell Toys made most of their yearly profits. Families came from across the state to buy hand-wrapped toys, take sleigh rides, and watch the grand lighting of the tree. This year, I outbid Walter. I bought the naming rights, the venue, the entire market. I didn't announce my name. I let the posters do the work. Legacy Workshop presents. The giving morning in memory of Charles Sanders. The town buzzed. Old-timers whispered. Some cried. And Walter? He called my office. Twice. Left no message. He knew. But I wasn't done yet. On Christmas Eve, I would stand under that same tree he used to light and flip the switch myself. This time for Daddy. The Lexington Holiday Market opened just 2 weeks before Christmas. But this year, it didn't sparkle with Walter Bell's icy banners or his smug family crest draped above every booth. This year, the flags bore a new symbol. 2 wooden hands holding a carved star, Legacy Workshop seal. The reaction? Electric. Children stared at the handmade nutcrackers displayed in glass. Parents gasped when they saw the return of the hand-carved sleighs their grandparents once gifted them. And the old-timers, they paused, hands trembling, recognizing the style, the woodwork, the love behind every toy. I walked through the market, anonymously at first, wrapped in a deep burgundy cloak. I stood near the music booth when I heard a woman whisper to her son, "That's how Sanders Toys used to do it." You could feel the care in each piece. A lump caught in my throat. Across the market square, Bell Toys' corner booth was nearly empty. Their plastic molds, factory-finished dolls, and battery-hungry robots couldn't compete with heart. But it wasn't just about sales. I wasn't here for revenge measured in dollars. I wanted something deeper. That's when I saw her, his wife, Madeline Bell. She was pacing near the fire pit with a fur shawl wrapped tightly around her neck. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the crowd, searching for someone who might explain why the name Bell no longer meant everything. Then came the announcement. A hush fell over the plaza as the choir prepared for the tree lighting. It had been a tradition since the early 1900s, usually led by the mayor. This year it was hosted by Legacy Workshop's anonymous founder. People wondered who it would be. The mayor stepped up and read from a crisp sheet, "Tonight's lighting will be dedicated to a man whose generosity built more than toys. He built memories. This town owes much to the hands and heart of Charles Sanders." Gasps echoed through the air, and then, I stepped forward. I removed my cloak. Some recognized me instantly. Others took a moment to remember the young girl clinging to her father's arm outside the original Sanders toy factory, but no one forgot what I said next. "My name is Brooklyn Sanders. My father was Charles. 10 years ago, we lost him and a legacy. But today, we're giving it back." A crowd erupted. I flipped the switch. The tree came alive in lights, hundreds of them, hand-tied, by volunteers and former Sanders employees. It glittered in gold, green, and red, topped by a star carved from the first wooden beam laid in the original factory. Children cheered. Bells rang, and I saw Walter Bell. He stood 30 feet back, half shaded under a pine awning, wearing a beige coat that couldn't hide the storm on his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his hands clenched, and I saw the exact moment he realized what I'd taken from him. Not just his market, not just his profits, his legacy, the one he stole from my father. I smiled, but I wasn't done yet, because the very next morning, Christmas Day, I would walk into Bell Toys' corporate office with a single red envelope in hand, and change everything he thought he still controlled. Christmas morning in Lexington was always slow and silver. Fog curled around the rooftops like smoke from a sleepy fire. Bells rang out from the hilltop church, and the snow blanketed everything in stillness, except for me. At precisely 7:30 a.m. I stepped out of a black carriage in front of Bell Enterprises, the glass and stone fortress that had once been our family's small factory lot. I wore no disguise this time. My coat was emerald green, the same shade my father used in his original logo. In my gloved hand was a red envelope, thick with weight, not just legal papers, history, consequence, truth. The security guard blinked at me as I walked through the revolving doors. He didn't stop me. No one did. In the lobby, Walter Bell's son, Andrew, was speaking with one of the junior accountants, both looking red-eyed and rumpled. Holiday morning meetings? That told me all I needed to know. Bell Toys was cracking. I took the elevator to the top floor. The brass plaque on the wall still read Walter R. Bell, Executive Chairman, the same title he claimed the day my father died. His secretary, a tired-looking woman with coffee stains on her collar, tried to wave me off. "Mr. Bell isn't seeing, he'll see me," I said, without raising my voice. "Tell him Brooklyn Sanders is here." She froze. 2 minutes later, his door creaked open. Walter Bell hadn't aged well. His once proud posture had slouched. His tailored suits hung a little looser. But his eyes, oh, they still burned with the same arrogance that stole from a grieving widow and a child to decades ago. He gestured to a chair like he still owned the air around him. "I suppose congratulations are in order," he said. "Nice little stunt last night." I smiled politely and handed him the envelope. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Bell." He didn't open it immediately. He watched me like a wolf sizing up a flame, but eventually, curiosity won. His hands trembled as he read. "Acquisition terms, Bell Toys Division, buyer, Legacy Workshop Holdings, effective." Immediately upon delivery spoke while he read. "Over the past year, I quietly bought out your supply chains, your shipping contracts, even your plastic mold supplier in Ohio. You never noticed because I used subsidiaries that didn't wear the Sanders name." His jaw flexed. "You've been bleeding for 6 months, Walter." Last night wasn't a stunt. It was the final chapter. His lips parted to argue, but he had no words. "And here's the real gift," I said softly, standing to leave. "Legacy Workshop won't be absorbing Bell Toys. It'll be shutting it down permanently. No buyouts, no pivots, no second acts." His face darkened. "You spiteful, no," I cut in. "You don't get to call me that. You stole my father's dream. You tricked my mother with legalese and pressure when she was mourning. You plastered your name on work you didn't create. And now your legacy ends here." I turned toward the door. "And the only thing your grandchildren will inherit from Bell Toys," I added, "is silence." He stood then, shoulders heaving, but didn't follow. The final thing I saw before the doors shut behind me was the envelope slipping from his hands and falling onto the floor, a red mark on marble, just like the stain he left on our name. I stepped into the snowy morning with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. The war my father never got to finish, I had ended it. Bell Toys was no more. By lunchtime, news had already begun to leak. A short blurb in the Lexington Herald. "Holiday shock. Bell Toys division acquired and ceases operations. Founder's daughter at helm." I didn't answer any press calls. I wasn't doing this for interviews or applause. I was doing it for him, for Dad, and for Mom, who never smiled the same after losing him or the factory they built together. I walked the length of the old town square, past the bakery that still sold ginger cookies shaped like rocking horses, one of Dad's original toy designs, past the hardware store where he bought bolts for dollhouse hinges, past the old community center where he'd once hosted Toy Day, a tradition where kids could build and take home simple wooden toys. All those years, Bell Toys had been churning out cheap plastic imitations, pretending they carried on my father's vision. But those toys never had soul. They had no purpose beyond profit. That was about to change. I crossed the street to a small, brick building with green shutters. On the door hung a wooden sign carved by hand, "The Legacy Workshop." Inside it was warm and fragrant with cedar and fresh glue. Shelves lined the walls, filled with handmade toys, spinning tops, puzzle boxes, music boxes with real brass keys, and dolls with sewn expressions that felt alive. "Brooklyn," Clara called from the back table, her hands covered in varnish. Clara Halstead had been my father's apprentice when I was a kid. She stayed in town after the factory closed and made toys out of her garage until I tracked her down. When I told her what I was planning, she didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she'd said, wiping her hands on an apron. "Let's make toys worth remembering." And we had. We weren't a toy empire, and we didn't want to be. We were something rarer, real, purposeful. I glanced at the large calendar tacked to the corkboard near the register. The day after Christmas was circled in red. Legacy's first annual free toy festival admission. Smiles only. That had been Dad's idea once, too, before Bell changed the rules and charged fees to offset costs. This year, every child who walked through our doors would leave with something handmade, and every toy would be branded with a tiny gold star, my father's maker's mark. Lost for years, now reborn. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden train engine. The very first toy I ever built on my own under Dad's guidance. I placed it on the shelf by the window, next to the newer pieces. It didn't shine or wind up, but it meant more than any gadget ever could. A customer entered, a young mother holding her daughter's mittened hand. "Is this the place with the real toys?" she asked softly. I smiled. "It is now." It was Christmas Eve when the last ghost of Belle toys came knocking. I was alone at the Legacy workshop, finishing up ribbon bows on a final batch of hand-carved nutcrackers. Clara had gone home early. She wanted to bake sugar pies for tomorrow's toy festival. Snow dusted the windowsill, soft as powdered sugar. The radio hummed low with old carols, and then the bell on the door jingled. I looked up from the workbench and froze. There he was, Walter Bell, older now, thinner. His once perfect salt and pepper hair had thinned into tufts. His tailored coat looked expensive, but wrinkled. He carried no cane, but moved with the heaviness of a man used to power. And suddenly aware it was slipping from his grip, "Brooklyn," he said, voice hoarse. "Didn't think you'd be the one I'd have to answer to." I stayed seated, fingers curling around a carving knife. Not in fear, just out of habit. Instinct. "I was always the one you underestimated," I said. "Seems fitting." He didn't smile. He looked around the workshop slowly, as though stepping into a memory he didn't know still existed. "So this is what you built?" "No. This is what you destroyed," I said. "I just brought it back." He gave a dry chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Belle Toys was my life. You stole it from my family," I said quietly. "Forged contracts, lied to my mother when she was grieving, took the factory, the workers, even the Christmas parade sponsorship. You think I didn't pay a price?" He barked, suddenly bitter. "Belle Toys is gone. The market turned on us. Cheap imports, greedy investors. I lost everything too. But not because you were betrayed," I said. "Because you were the betrayer." He stared at the floor. "Why buy the factory? Why crush what little was left?" I stood up, walking around the counter slowly. "I didn't do it to crush you, Walter," I said. "I did it to cleanse the memory. Belle Toys was once a place of wonder and warmth. You turned it into a cash machine." I simply pulled the plug. He looked up at me, eyes sunken. "You could have let it die quietly. Why the spectacle?" I reached into the drawer beside the register and pulled out a small tin box. Inside was a faded photo of my father in his overalls, holding up a wooden rocking horse, beaming like a boy. I held it out to him. "This is why," I said. "Because that joy is still real for kids who never had it. Because tomorrow, 100 children will wake up and walk into this place and feel what your factory stopped offering long ago, magic." He didn't take the photo. Instead, he turned toward the door, hand trembling on the knob. "I should have seen it," he said. "You were always watching." "No, Walter," I whispered. "I was learning." The bell jingled again as he walked out into the snow. I watched from the window as his figure grew smaller, swallowed by white flurries. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The past didn't haunt me anymore. It had been acknowledged, faced, and finally forgiven. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, which is why, before he disappeared from view, I whispered, "Merry Christmas, Walter," and then turned back to the workbench, where a train set waited for finishing touches. Tomorrow, joy would return to the place my father once dreamed of, and that was the only legacy that mattered now. By the time the sun peeked over the frosted hills of Waverly County, Legacy Workshop was already aglow. The doors swung open at precisely 9, as promised, and the first children dashed in with scarves flying and mittens clapping. Clara stood by the welcome table, handing out peppermint sticks and little wooden bells strung on red ribbon. The scent of pine and gingerbread swirled in the air, and the soft jingle of sleigh bells followed every step across the polished floorboards. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel like the girl guarding my father's memory. I felt like I was continuing it. Dozens of families came. Some had children who'd never owned a handmade toy. Some were local artisans we'd invited to show their crafts in the old display hall. Others had been former Belle Toys workers, now our team, who proudly showed their kids where they once worked, now reborn under a new name, with dignity. I spotted Mrs. Fallon, the factory seamstress who used to bring me hot cocoa when I sat with Dad in the late hours. Her grandson tugged at her hand, pointing to the hand-carved puppets. "We used to make ones just like that," she told him, her voice cracking. I stood beside the toy train platform where tiny locomotives puffed clouds of lavender-scented steam. My father's train design was still there, the one with the silver chimney and maplewood wheels. Kids crowded around it, eyes wide with delight. One little girl clapped and shouted, "It's real." For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined Dad standing beside me, in his flannel shirt and ink-stained fingers, nodding with quiet pride. We'd brought back Wonder at noon. We paused for the dedication ceremony. A stage had been set near the center of the floor, beneath a giant wreath of pine and holly. I stepped up, nerves fluttering, but I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Clara adjusted the microphone, and I began. Years ago, this town lost a tradition. We lost a toy factory, a community, a belief that joy could be handcrafted, passed from heart to hand, not just sold in catalogs or made by machines. I looked into the crowd. Faces stared up, expectant, hopeful, tearful. But sometimes, what's taken can be reclaimed. What's stolen can be restored. There was a hush. I felt my voice steady. This place is not just about toys. It's about second chances, for memory, for honor, for those who worked in silence, and those who were forgotten. I reached for a cloth-covered sign beside the podium and pulled it down, revealing the new name carved in warm oak and gold leaf, Sanders and Son, a legacy of play. Gasps. Then applause. Someone started cheering. Kids rang their little wooden bells. I smiled, because that name wasn't just mine. It was his. After the ceremony, people lined up to take photos with the giant nutcracker I'd carved by hand. The mayor stopped by and promised annual funding. 2 newspapers requested interviews. I said maybe next week, but the best moment came late in the afternoon, when I returned to the display shelf in the corner where our special edition toys were showcased. There, in the center, sat a familiar toy, a rocking horse, maplewood, handmade, with initials burned into the saddle. J's Joseph Sanders, my father's first ever toy. I hadn't seen it since I was 12. Clara stood behind me. One of the workers found it in the attic of the old Bell Toys building. Said he thought it belonged here. It did, and I knew exactly where it would go, in a glass case, right by the entrance, for everyone to see, not because it was perfect, but because it endured, and so had we. That evening, as the last sleigh ride wound down and the strings of twinkling lights dimmed to a soft golden glow, I stood alone in the old founder's office, once occupied by my father, then stolen by Gerald Blake. Now it was mine again. The oak desk bore new carvings, delicate vines with tiny initials etched into the leaves. I traced one of the patterns with my finger beads for Brooklyn Sanders. But beside it, on the underside of the drawer, still hid my father's initials, J's. The only thing Gerald hadn't stripped or repainted. He hadn't known what mattered. I reached into a drawer and pulled out the envelope Gerald had dropped when he was escorted out. A torn edge, a gold foil seal. Inside it, a checkbook, one check, half filled, dated December 24th, made out to a supplier who'd been overcharging the factory for years. Gerald had been stealing till the very last. No apology, not even a goodbye. But I didn't need one. He had taken everything from us. Then he lost everything trying to prove he deserved it. That's the thing about men like him, they build kingdoms on borrowed trust and expect it to last forever. But legacies? Real legacies are built on something stronger. Love, grit, memory. I didn't plan to destroy him. I just planned to replace him, and I had. The next morning, Christmas morning, I hosted a private breakfast in the workshop's newly restored Great Hall. We invited every surviving former employee from Bell Toys and their families. Some had gray hair now, some had walkers, some still called me Joey's little girl. I was proud of that. We served cinnamon rolls, spiced cider, and had a toy waiting on every chair. Handmade, stamped with the new logo, Sanders and Son. Halfway through the breakfast, Clara whispered, "There's someone outside asking to speak with you. He says he's from Blake's old board." I wiped my hands and went to the front. A man in a heavy wool coat and wire-framed glasses stood by the pine archway. Late 50s, thinning hair, apologetic expression. His name was Richard Hale, once Gerald's right hand. "I heard what happened," he began. "Blake's estate, it's gone. The debt's caught up. Lawsuits pending. He's living out of a boarding house in Albany." I nodded. "I'm aware." Richard hesitated. "He asked me to deliver this." He handed me a small velvet box. Inside, a A single toy soldier, painted clumsily, cracked at the base. I recognized it. It was the first one I ever made, in this very factory. My father kept it on his shelf. I looked at Richard. Why now? Richard shrugged. Maybe he wanted to return something he never earned. I closed the box and handed it back. Tell him to keep it. Sometimes reminders are more important than regrets. Richard nodded and left. Later that day, I placed a plaque at the factory gates. It read, "In memory of those who build with their hands and love with their hearts. For every dreamer, builder, and believer, welcome home." Children ran past it as they entered. Parents smiled. Laughter echoed from the sledding hill nearby. The toy factory, once shuttered in greed, was now alive with joy. My father's spirit was everywhere. In the shelves, the sawdust, the jingle of bells, the scent of fresh pine and peppermint. But most of all, it lived in me. Because I had done what he always believed I could. I had taken back what mattered. Not just the building, not just the brand, but the magic. That night, when the guests had left and the last embers in the fireplace faded to orange, whispers, I walked the halls alone. The air smelled of cedar and cocoa. Every step I took echoed with memory of a girl who once hid behind crates, sketching toy ideas in her father's workshop notebook. Of a woman who returned, not with anger, but with something far stronger, purpose. In the main hallway, beneath a framed portrait of my father, I placed the brass key that once locked me out of the factory for good. Next to it, I hung the deed to Bell Toys, now Sanders and Son Industries, framed in red velvet and snow-dusted pine. Then I climbed the stairs to the office, sat in the chair Gerald once claimed, and lit a candle. Across the desk sat a little boy, wide-eyed, gap-toothed, holding a teddy bear too big for his arms. His name was Caleb, one of the local orphans. I like this place, he whispered. It smells like magic. I smiled. It is magic, Caleb. And now, it's yours too. He hugged his bear tighter. It was never about revenge, not really. Not by the end. It was about reclaiming a legacy that was rightfully mine and using it to uplift the people who were forgotten. People like my father. People like Caleb. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to win. Gerald Blake spent his final Christmas exiled from the very empire he stole, watching from the windows of a rented room. No press, no gala, no bells, just silence. I didn't hate him. He had taught me something: what greed looks like up close, but more importantly, what grit can overcome. I used his own tools business, branding, deals to beat him, but where he built for himself, I built for others. And when my name was finally etched into the world, it wasn't just as a woman of power. It was as Brooklyn Sanders, daughter of Joseph Sanders, founder of Dreams, defender of joy, believer in me. Now, every year on Christmas, I host a legacy gala, not for billionaires and backpatters, but for orphans, single parents, and workers who make the season bright. We serve roasted apples, sweet bread, and toy kits for every child who walks through the door. We even named our best toy train set after Gerald's old catchphrase, top of the track. Only now, it carries passengers made of gingerbread and a conductor named Joey. Poetic, isn't it? Full circle. As I stood by the window and watched the snow blanket the town below, I whispered something into the quiet. You didn't break us, Gerald. You made us stronger. And I knew somewhere, my father was smiling. Now, a few questions to reflect on this story. Do you think Brooklyn would have become who she is without the betrayal she faced? Was her revenge more about justice or healing? What would you have done in her place? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.